Well, I wanted to produce this video, and it's going to be a little bit different than the last video. In fact, I would say it's going to be almost in diametrical opposition to the last video. Well, in the last video, I talked a lot about how would you present to the business, and the business is not very concerned about technical design, all the sort of things that come in the discipline of what we do. But there is a time for us to get very detailed when we're presenting to people, and that is with our own peers, and I would say especially with an art director. Okay, so the first one that we're going to present to you is the brand. The brand is definitely the centerpiece. We have to have some kind of point of view on how we're taking care of the brand. It could be that we take a loose interpretation of the brand, and there might be some room, and you may have talked to the business that the brand is not something that's guarded too closely, and so you make a decision to be a little bit looser with the brand, and then you may work for another company where the brand is almost policed. In fact, there's a department that enforces that everything that's being done is according to brand standards. But whatever the case, you really want to make sure that you have a well thought out point of view, because the most important thing for a brand and being a steward of the brand is consistency, to make sure that you're upholding the brand, that you're not veering off from the brand. There may have been even millions of dollars that have been spent on producing this brand and keeping this brand. So you really want to have a very well thought out stance on how strict you are with the brand. And then, of course, you're going to want to comb through your design and make sure that you're following that kind of interpretation of the brand. Do you really need to use a different red in a certain spot? Why are you introducing a rounded corner when the brand really has more of a square look to it? So all these there's a lot of different kind of things that you need to put into it. The other thing that you're going to want to make sure that you're looking at is, every brand's got a tone. There's a way that things are written. There is an attitude. There's a feeling. There's an emphasis. And so make sure that your design captures the essence of the brand if you are trying to be adherent to the brand. Okay, well, the next point that I want to bring you to is kind of repetitions and patterns. It's a little bit similar to the last point that I brought out. But when you're designing, you're probably not designing something as a complete standalone. Your design fits somewhere probably within a website. You may be doing it from scratch, but you may be making one page or a section within a website, and you're going to want to make sure that you're in harmony. And so one thing I do is when I work on a particular project, I do a lot of research to see all the patterns that have been used on other pages of the website, other microsites, other websites that the company has, take a look at brochures, and I try to make sure that I'm not veering off too far from what the company already has. And then if you drill down a little bit further, the word patterns, there's UI patterns, but there's also patterns as in, maybe that there's a certain element that you should be using. For example, sometimes there's a 5-pixel line that looks bubbly. It's got a 20-pixel round radius to it that gives it a certain kind of look. Before you go ahead and just start designing away, a lot of times the best thing that you could do is to find a pattern that's out there that meets the need that you're already trying to solve, and simply use that pattern, especially if that pattern is kind of close to your design. It's in a section or a page that comes before you. I've seen many situations where a designer will do something very beautiful, but the problem is when I click through and I see 7 pages, this one page kind of stands out that it's different. And so I'll even go so far to say that there's times where I could make something look a lot better, but I make a deliberate decision to use this kind of even dated font style, guideline, this older guideline, because I need to be consistent with the particular section is, and we've made a concerted decision that we are not going to do a full redesign at this point. With UI patterns, design systems are really becoming popularized, but design systems really specify how certain buttons should be used. What button is for a primary button? What is secondary? What is maybe a text link? What is the way that you can kind of size these buttons? Is it okay to kind of size it to anything you want? But even if there's not a standard that's in place, you really want to be careful about just kind of introducing too much variance within your design. You want to kind of keep it tight. You got one button for a primary action. You've got another button that's used in other situations. You got this kind of call to action button. But you don't want to be just inventing patterns just because you feel it looks better with that one photo that you have. So another one is of course mobility. Of course, we know that websites. A lot of times, people are not. A lot of people don't even own a computer, or some people just own an iPad, and they do their browsing that way. I'd say everyone owns a phone, but you want to make sure that you have a very well thought out stance on how much you're emphasizing the different form factors, and be able to speak to that. And so if you know that your design is mobility first, you're going to want to make sure that you're presenting mobility first. Show mobile designs first. And if you are doing something that's very responsive, it scales. There's the side of how it scales, but there's also another element. You want to make sure that should you maybe hide an entire section altogether, should you shorten labels, these are all things that can be done with responsive design, but you want to make sure that you have that well thought out. And then the last point, I think, over the years is something that's become very important, and I think a lot of us are paying a lot more attention to, is accessibility. The two low-hanging fruits on accessibility are contrast and size. There's a lot of contrast checkers out there, and there's also just the size of the fonts that you're using. How readable is it? And then on the coding side of things, of course, there's a lot of tags and a specific way that you code it that can make it more accessible for a voice reader. But if you really want to go a step further, the way to really make sure that you're being a steward of accessibility is to do subjective testing. Test on the kind of devices that you're specifically trying to target. For example, I worked on a website where there was a lot of people that were stroke victims, and those stroke victims particularly, they didn't use voice browsers, but they needed to sometimes zoom in a lot. And there was also other victims that did need to use the voice browsers. So those are some devices that you're going to want to actually comb through and see what is the experience you to take care of when you're about to go in front of design. Maybe you're at the final stage, and I know a lot of times we get too close to our work and we're looking at things from a very aesthetic, emotional point of view. But I want to give you some practical points of just combing through the design, through these 5 factors. And I think that will, help you in presenting your design before you try to get an internal approval within your design department. So there you have it. Thanks for sticking with me.